He's starting to record right now.
Okay. Okay, remember to smile. Smile. Don't look so serious.
Wake up. Mm-hmm.
Hello, my name is Cheryl Saffold, and I am your moderator today for the Black History Notebook Project. Here as well is Mr. Fred Harris, former director of the Public Safety and Service for the City of Warren, and Mr. Thomas Connolly, who is the president of the Greater Warren Youngstown Urban League. Mr. Harris, would you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, in our form of government here in Warren, Ohio, I was the director of public safety and service. And what that means is basically I was the city manager. It was my job to supervise the police, the fire, the water, the wastewater. In other words, anybody who worked for the city of Warren, they came under my auspices. I had over a $78 million budget and 500 employees.
All right, thank you very much. And Mr. Connolly, would you explain to us your role as president and director of the Greater Warren Youngstown Urban League?
But Cheryl, my role, I'll start off with our mission. Our mission is to enable African Americans and others to obtain economic self-reliance, parity, power, and civil rights. We do that through programs that we offer at the Urban League. Our particular Urban League has been open since 1930 in the city of Warren, and something to be very proud of. The National Urban League, which we're an affiliate of, has been in existence since 1910.
All right. Mr. Harris, this project was your vision. How did you become so passionate about Black history?
Well, Cheryl, I'm 73 years old. In other words, I'm an old man. And I've seen a lot. And I was brought up during the 60s. That was my heyday when I was in high school. The era of the Black Panthers, the Black Nationalists, the Civil Rights Movement. And I had some very, very tough experiences. And I think that the generation now, the young people out there now, they should understand what we went through and understand whose shoulders that they stand upon. And these stories that you're going to hear, keep in mind, once these people are no longer here, these stories are gone because you're not going to find these stories in any books. So that's why history is so important.
All right, and would you even expound more so on the Black History Notebook? Why did you decide to interview elderly Americans, African Americans in this area?
Well, because like I said, I think history is one of the most important subjects that you can take in school, besides math and science. And the reason why, if you don't know who you are, you don't know where you come from, you don't know where you're going. It's like a roadmap. So you have to understand how you got where you're at today. And these people that you're going to see on these films, they have stories that you've never, like I said, you've never heard these stories, and you've never seen these stories or heard them in history books or on film. And people ask me all the time, history. And I tell them the definition of history is his story. And it's what you're going to hear are these people's stories.
Mr. Connolly, I often hear people say, well, why do we need to celebrate Black History Month every February? Would you tell us, in your opinion, why you think it's important to still celebrate Black History Month?
Well, Black history is very important from the standpoint of it is history. It is history. As we can recall, over the years, blacks had a very intricate part of building these United States. And we need to celebrate those contributions. We need to understand the real sacrifices that they went through to achieve and to make life better for all of us today.
All right, we are getting ready to look at our very first video. And the very first video features Mr. Fred Harris. And so let's roll the video, please.
I grew up right here in the city of Warren. Grew up on the east side of Warren. Lived in a place called the Benton Homes. Back then we called it the Projects. That's where I grew up. And I was raised there, and I lived there until I was 12, 13 years old. And then I moved to the west side of Warren. And I lived there the rest of my life, well, the rest of my life, until I was out of high school and I went into the military. You have to remember, we're talking about in the late 40s and the early 50s, 1950s. Everything was segregated at the time, and my generation was the last generation to live under legalized segregation. Until the 1964 Civil Rights Act, everything was segregated. They had the right to tell you, you can't sit in the front of the bus, you have to sit on the back of the bus. Downtown Warren, the only place that an African American could use the bathroom was downstairs in the courthouse, the old courthouse down there. You know, it was legal then. The segregation was legal. The most popular movie was the Robbins Theater and the Daniels Theater. When you went into the Daniels Theater, we knew that we had to sit on the right-hand side of the theater. The middle and the left-hand side was reserved for Caucasians. So we had to sit on one side. All the blacks had to sit on one side. In the Robbins Theater, the blacks had to sit in the balcony. So I joined the military. I said I'll join the military. Me and my buddy there, Dave Jackson, Willie Jackson, so we went and joined the military. That was the best thing that ever happened to me in my life because it changed my entire life.
And how was that?
Well, I went through my basic training and everything, and at the time, they had the Cuban crisis come up, where they put the missiles in Cuba, and President Kennedy found out that there was missiles in Cuba, and he told Khrushchev and the Russians, get the missiles out or we're gonna invade Cuba. Well, I had just finished my training, my basic training and stuff. It was down there at Fort Benning, Georgia. And I thought we was going on a training mission one day. They called us all together and had us get our gear and get on the back of trucks. And we said, oh, okay, we're going to have a training mission. And we kept going and going and going. This was what's going on. So finally, to make a long story short, they took us to Florida. And they informed us that the Russians were on their way with more missiles to bring into Cuba. And the United States had to put up a blockade around Cuba, that if those Russian ships tried to break that blockade, we were going to invade Cuba. Well, it scared the death out of us, okay? Because I said, this is for real, I can get killed. Fortunately, and lucky for us, the Russian ships turned around. They didn't try to break the blockade, okay? Now they gave us a leave of absence. They said, okay, everybody can go home for 15 days because of the stress and stuff. So, you know, we were super happy. So we ran out, and that soon as we got back, you know, we didn't even change our uniform. We had our assembly, you know, and they said, okay, you're dismissed. So I had 3 white friends, and one of them lived in Columbus, and he had his car down there. So he said, Fred, you can ride as far as Columbus with me, and then you can catch a bus into Warren. So I said, great. So we ran, and we jumped in the car. We didn't even eat. We just took off. We wanted to get out of there. We wanted to go home. We rode for about an hour, and finally we needed some gas, and we was hungry. We wanted to get some food. We stopped at a small, now it would be like a convenience store. This fellow that was with me, big fellow, he was from Minnesota. His name was Unger. He said, okay, I'll get the gas. You guys can go ahead and get something to eat. I forgot that I was in Georgia. Now keep in mind, this was in 1961. So my 2 buddies with me, the 2 white fellas, we went to go into the convenience mart, and as soon as we opened the door, it hit me, I'm in Georgia, and there was 3 or 4 truckers sitting on stools. And the young lady behind the bar, she couldn't have been no more than about 18 or 19, and she looked at me, and she just stared at me, and I stopped. And the 2 guys beside me, white guys, they stopped. We froze. And she was very nice. She said, I can't serve you. And that was the first time I ran into open racism. And she said, I can't serve you. And the two guys beside me said, well, what do you mean you can't serve him? And she said, we're not allowed to serve colored people. Well, all I wanted to do was get out of there because I'm thinking about all the stories, you know, they're gonna hang me, they're gonna beat me. And so the two guys beside me kept saying, don't you see, what do you mean you can't serve him? And so Unger came in from pumping the gas and he said, what's going on? He was a muscular guy. What's going on? I said, well, they won't serve Fred. And he said, what do you mean they won't serve him? And the girl behind the counter, she said, if I serve him, they'll fire me. And he said, don't you see he has a United States Army uniform on? We just came from Florida. What do you mean you can't serve him? A hamburger. And all I said was, look, let's go. Because I was afraid of what those truckers was gonna do. And I said, let's go. So we turned around, we got in the car, I said, look, we find a place, you guys go in, get something to eat, and you can bring it out to me. Well, we drove for about another half an hour or something, it was getting dark. So there was this place that they pulled into this restaurant, and I could hear the country and western music coming out and everything. It was getting dark. So I said, okay, go ahead and, go ahead and get something, bring it out, okay. So I was sitting in the car by myself, I was in the front. And I thought about it and I said, you know what? What'll happen if these people come out of this restaurant and find me out here? They may kill me. So I got scared. I said, I'm gonna get in the back seat because there was an army coat, a long army coat. We wore these long coats at the time, and I was bringing one home for my father. So I said, okay, I'm gonna get in the back of the car. Now I knew better than to open the door because I didn't want the light to come on. I didn't want anybody to see me. So I took and I crawled over the top of the seat and I laid down in the back of the car and I put the coat over me so nobody would see me, and I laid down there. This is what changed my life. I laid there and I cried. And the reason why I cried, I thought just a couple months ago, I was up there at Warren Harding High School and I played in the football game. The biggest crowd that they ever had at Warren Harding High School, 13,000 people. We beat Massillon. I ran the last touchdown, and I was the hero of the school. And here I am laying in the back of a car, covered up with a coat, because I couldn't buy a hamburger, and scared that these people in the United States of America, scared that they're gonna kill me. And I was willing to give my life to help defend this country. What am I doing? And that changed my whole life. And after that, I became super militant. Make a long story short, he became mayor of the city. And when he became mayor of the city, he said, I want you to be the city manager. I want you to be the director of public safety and service. In our form of government statutory system here in Warren, the director of public safety and service is the city manager. He runs everything. The mayor only has to be in the office one day out of 90 days. So little did I know that I would wind up with 500 employees, the police, the fire, operations, everybody worked for me. Who would have ever thought? I grew up right here.
Our next person interviewed is Miss Juanita Williams. Mr. Connolly, would you tell us who Miss Juanita Williams is?
Miss Juanita Williams is, I have the fondest respect for that family. I grew up on a city in Youngstown on the north side with them. What I remember the most when of course she was the owner of McCullough Williams Funeral Home, I should say. But they also had a football team. They had a little league football team in which I was part of, in which to today has been influential in my life. They left a legacy, without a doubt, in our communities, and we're very proud. I mean, talking about football, we played at Cleveland Stadium. We was able to do that because of McCullough Williams football, because of the sacrifices. Her husband was one of the first black councilmen for the city of Youngstown, also president of council. So it was a lot of sacrifices they made over the years, and really they paved the way, left a legacy, and were real role models for our community. Let's take a look at the video now.
Well, be true to yourself, and you must get an education. Education today is the key to success. Without education, you are not going to make it in this world. It used to be getting a high school degree was enough, but that is nothing today. You must have college training, at least 4 years of college. And now for prominent and top positions in companies, you must have your master's. And then, of course, if you have your doctor's degree, then you can demand more.
Okay, I am Crystal Ann Williams Costa, and this is my mother, Juanita Williams, and they just asked me to tell a short story. My dad was president of the Youngstown School Board, and at that time he hired the first black superintendent, who was Bob Pegues, who later became superintendent of the Warren schools. But it would have been the year of 1970, my dad was hiring black administrators for the Youngstown Public Schools, and they bombed our house. It was 2 weeks before Christmas, because they were angry that my father had made such an impact when it came to the hiring, because he actually had to go outside the city. He went to down south to the southern black universities, Morehouse, Spelman, Bennett, Southern University, and they went and found qualified individuals and brought them in, and they were able to get black administrators hired, and that offended some folks, and so they bombed our house.
Our next subject is Mr. Willie Joe Jackson. Mr. Harris, who is Willie Joe Jackson?
Mr. Willie Joe Jackson, one of my favorite people. Mr. Jackson is 86 years old, and he migrated from the Deep South. When I say the Deep South, I'm talking about Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. And Willie Joe came up to work in the steel mills, like I said, like most of the blacks. But it's very interesting because he came here at the age of 20, and how he became a Warren City policeman. It's a very interesting story, because at the time we only had like 6 or 7 black policemen. So I'll let Willie Joe tell you how and why he became a Warren City policeman.
Actually, Warren had a lot more things then than they have now. I went with my uncle to I call it a curb market or something. Most of y'all don't even know nothing about it. You know what a school building is now? Right on the corner of High Street and Park Avenue. There was a flea market in that inside, curb market they call it. It caught a fire a few days after I went in there. I went in there with my uncle. And it's like the one they had off of East 9th Street in Cleveland. You know what I'm talking about? It was right there. They sold everything, meats, vegetables, the whole works. And one night that caught a fire and burned down.
Our next subject to be interviewed is Betty Saffold, my 80-year-old mother. She will discuss her experiences in the Deep South in Alabama and how she herself encountered racism.
Remember incident that one of my cousins came back from Ohio, and she was young with her parents. They came back and they went into town, into Laverne. And by her not knowing that you were supposed to say yes, sir, or yes, ma'am to white people, they went in the store, and they asked them something, the little girl, and she said yes. And they looked at her, and they asked her again, and she said yes, not knowing what it was, you know. And the guy came from behind the counter and slapped her. And they just had to get out of there because, you know, they knew what would happen if they fought back or anything, so they had to leave. They was from Canton. The little girl was about 7 or 8. So we went to a gas station to gas up on our way back home, And Tom went in and got a soda. And the man said, are you going to pay for that soda? And he said, yes. And he said again, are you going to pay for that soda? And he said, yes, not knowing he was trying to get yes, sir, out of him, you know. So at that time, my father-in-law came up. He saw what was going on. He came up, so he said, here, take the money, you know, and he had the guy to go out to the car. And the guy came out with a hoe, and he was hitting our car. He was trying to get to Tom.
Our final interview today will be with Mr. Joseph Connolly. Thomas, would you tell us something about your father?
Yes, I will. Imagine going to school in Tennessee in a one-room schoolhouse. Imagine walking to work from one side to another, 3 jobs, and going to college at the same time. Imagine being in high school with a high school classmate that became the first black superintendent in the Youngstown school system, then the Warren school system, and my father being the second black superintendent. All these things he did, and imagine being committed to education when you won the state champion, almost won the state championship in football, and was offered a job at Camp McKinley and turned it down because you wanted to be an educator. I'm going to let him tell some of his story.
No one, again, could control this class. And I went in the classroom and I told them that I only had one rule. When I talk, nobody talks. So they had this great big boy, he was about my size, that started talking. I told him to be quiet. He kept talking. So they had these desks that there was a chair and then the desk that was made onto it. So like I said, he was almost big as I was. So I said, if you keep talking, I'm gonna pick you up and throw you in the hall. So he kept talking. And when I pulled him through that desk, went to the door and closed the door.
Mr. Harris, this is not the end of the Black History Notebook. Would you tell us what your plans are for the future?
Well, no, this is just the beginning. This was just a prototype that we wanted to do to see how it came out. Because, like I said before, Black history is a never-ending story. It should never stop. That's why I'm not a big fan of Black History Month. You know, when it first started, it was Black History Week, then they moved it up to Black History Month. Black history should be 365 days a year, 12 months out of the year should be Black history. You never forget from whence you came.
All right. Thank you very much for watching the Black History Notebook.